yourselves and your teacher. Then I'll read the question. We're going to ask you about question 1 this morning. Then we'll hear your opening statement and have a chance to ask you questions. And as you know, the question period this morning is 10 minutes, and we'll conclude with some feedback. My name is Dan Taubman. I'm a senior judge on the Colorado Court of Appeals in Denver, Colorado.
My name is Susan Firestone. I'm a retired patent attorney in Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Who comes out of retirement this morning to do this, is that right?
Yes.
And I'm Mike Miles from Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm curious, I see the World Strides tablecloth there. Are y'all in Washington?
We are.
Yes.
I thought so. So it's 11 o'clock where you are and not 8 o'clock, which gives you a huge advantage.
Okay.
We're awake, don't worry.
Yeah, y'all are awake. In that case, y'all do all the hard work because Judge Talman and I are not awake yet. So y'all do all the good hard work. Nice to see you.
Would you introduce yourselves and your teacher, please?
Hello, we are Unit 3 from Grant High School in Portland, Oregon. My name is Finnegan Jarrell.
I'm Zoe Wong.
My name is Silani Luengo.
I am Jordan Galloway.
And I'm Thomas Dake, and with us today is our teacher, Ms. Steve Pasquale.
Good morning.
Well, welcome again. Let me read the question. The right to vote was not expressly included in the U.S. Constitution of 1787. In your opinion, was the implied right to vote in the Constitution sufficient for the creation of a representative democracy? How did the exemption of voting rights affect the evolution of democracy in our country? Please give examples. Which is the greater threat to democracy, disenfranchisement or fraud? Explain your position. You may begin.
In theory, the implied right to vote in the Constitution was sufficient for the creation of a representative democracy. It guaranteed the right of some people to vote. Article 1, Section 2 states that representatives shall be chosen every second year by the people. And Article 4, Section 4 guarantees to every state a Republican form of government. However, the suffrage clause left all other aspects of suffrage up to the states. Many states restricted the right to vote so much that the United States was not really a government deriving its powers from the consent of the governed.
At the time of ratification, most states restricted their voting franchise to land-owning white men. Over time, the right to vote expanded from a state-by-state standard to a national concept. The evolution of voting rights began in individual states during the age of Jacksonian democracy. According to scholar Stanley L. Ingerman, by 1820, more than half of adult white males were casting votes, with the exception of 4 states which still retained property requirements or significant tax requirements. In the same period, some states added property requirements and amended their constitutions to disenfranchise free Black men.
The 15th Amendment brought the next stage of the evolution, but Southern resistance prevented its enforcement decades after Reconstruction was thwarted. Next, the 19th and 26th Amendments expanded suffrage to 26 million women and 10 million 18 to 20-year-olds respectively. The Civil Rights Movement culminated in the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965, which established the first meaningful protection of suffrage for Black voters.
Voter disenfranchisement is a greater threat to democracy than individual voter fraud. According to the Brennan Center, US elections have only a 0.0003% rate of fraud. Though it is prevalent in some other countries, in the United States, fraud has been significantly reduced with poll watchers, secret ballots, and signature matches. Laws apparently designed to suppress voters are common, and unlike voter fraud, are often perfectly legal. The 2013 decision of Shelby County v. Holder opened the door to modern laws aimed at suppressing voters by eliminating the Voting Rights Act's pre-clearance provision. Over 440 voter suppression bills have been passed since 2020 alone, and there are many prominent examples, including Texas Senate Bill 1, Florida Senate Bill 90, and Georgia House Bill 202. Other bills await passage, such as Arizona Senate Bill 2241, which states that any person who collects voted or unvoted early ballots from another person shall be guilty of a Class 6 felony.
However, blatant lies by former President Trump and some members of the Republican Party are a type of fraud and a greater threat to our democracy than suppression or voter fraud. Their claim that the last election was stolen has had a far greater harm on our democracy than any instance of individual voter fraud. This has caused monumentous distrust in our electoral system. According to Pew Research, 34% of voters still believe the election was stolen. This lie was so strong that hundreds of Americans stormed our own Capitol building to combat a problem that didn't exist. The expansion of voting rights, from arbitrary state laws to federal protections, allows democracy to flourish. However, more protections are necessary to solidify our gains made towards equality. We support the passage of many bills, such as the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and HR 1, among others, to protect democracy. Thank you, and we are ready for your questions.
Thank you for your opening statement. In Colorado, we have mail-in ballots. Do you think that that type of voting secures safe voting, or do you think it creates risks of election fraud?
In our own state of Oregon, we also have all mail-in ballots. And right now, it contributes to an 84% voter turnout, which is one of the highest in the country. That means that our elections are one of the most democratic. So even though it seems on the surface it might be subject to fraud, the reality is that it's more beneficial to our democracy.
In addition, we still have security measures such as random reviews and signature matches that allow democracy to be protected while still having that accessibility of voting.
Which in your opinion is suppresses voting more, gerrymandering, or as you were talking about the changes, the increasing restrictions on voting, on the voting rolls, for example?
I personally believe that gerrymandering is a big restriction on voting because even if one is able to actually vote in the elections, there's a high chance that their vote will never actually count, and the person they want to elect will never be elected.
However, one way we can combat this is with independent redistricting commissions, as allowed by Arizona State Legislator, the Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission.
I would like to disagree. Currently, under Crawford v. Marion County, voting laws like that require voter ID allow great restrictions to the right to vote, and in many ways disenfranchise a lot of people that otherwise would have their say in democracy.
Let me tell you about the Crawford County v. Marion County Board of Elections. As my colleague stated, there was a photo ID law, and Justice Souter dissented on it, which they found that it was constitutional because it was a narrowly tailored governmental interest. But Justice Souter dissented because he said that it would disproportionately affect the elderly and the disabled and the poor because they wouldn't have time to, or they wouldn't have access to go to the DMV for a photo ID. And it would affect 1% of the population, but that would amount to 43,000 people.
I believe that voter disenfranchisement has a greater impact. For example, in Georgia, during the 2017 election, they purged several 100,000 voters from the rolls.
Thank you.
Over the last 2 days, you've had a voting rights question, this one, and an equal protection question. I guess that was question 2. The Constitution guarantees every one of us equal protection under the law, but if it lets felons who have served their sentence in one state vote, but not in another, if they allow longer mail-in time in one state and a much shorter one in another, if they allow same-day registration, same-day voting in one state, but not in another, every time those that are denied the privileges that others in other states get, does the Constitution fail to keep its promise to those who have tighter voting rights than others?
Well, I see sort of 2 parts to that. One of them is the Times, Places, and Manners Clause, which gives states leeway in regulating their own elections subject to Congress. And the other part of that is that equal protection does not deny necessarily unequal laws. It just means that they have to meet, in this case with voting, strict scrutiny or a compelling government interest that's narrowly tailored.
In many ways, federalism can strengthen our elections. It can allow for different approaches to be taken to make more secure elections or more open elections. In my opinion, I feel that some of the laws that have been passed in other states are clearly restrictive and a negative impact on our democracy. But due to federalism and how important that is to our country, that should be preserved because after the COVID-19 pandemic, the different responses to the pandemic showed that it could have varying levels of protection. For us in Oregon, for example, we had a very strong response to COVID, and because of that, we had less cases and less deaths.
But as a consequence, voting is not uniform from state to state. And because of this, some people have it really easy when it comes to voting. And some people are going to, they might have like one day where they can vote or have stricter deadlines.
Thank you.
Can you explain to us what the difference is between racial gerrymandering and partisan gerrymandering?
Well, under the precedent of Rucho v. Common Cause, partisan gerrymandering is allowed because partisan gerrymandering is a political question that will interfere with the impartialness of the judicial branch of government.
Essentially, gerrymandering in general being just drawing districts to favor a certain party, or in the case of Reno v. Shaw and Baker v. Carr, not a certain racial group. I think partisan gerrymandering can have some benefits in securing a guaranteed vote and guaranteed representative, but it also has the negative that maybe orphan voters or people who are in the minority party will never get their voice heard.
Partisan gerrymandering in our current winner-takes-all election system means that, like my colleague just said, voters won't get any say in elections and will ultimately get no representation in Congress, which means they can check out from elections. And the more people you have check out from elections, the less democratic your elections become. Meanwhile, in Miller v. Johnson, the court outlawed all racial, a district in Georgia drawn specifically for the purpose of creating an all African-American district to give them a guaranteed representative in Congress. However, this was not narrowly tailored enough of a district drawn in order for it to be constitutional, because they didn't acknowledge whether all the African-Americans in this district had the same political beliefs.
Do you think that non-citizens who are, say, legal residents in this country should be allowed to vote? Why or why not?
I believe so. In New York City, they recently passed a measure that allows non-citizens to vote in some elections. And I think that the argument that maybe they're less committed to the country has some merit. They're still lawful permanent residents. They've already shown a commitment to America. And I think it helps cement the consent of the governed to have a wider range of democracy.
I mean, that may be true, but I don't think lawful permanent residents having the right to vote should be our top priority in suffrage. We should instead extend the right to vote in presidential elections to those citizens living in the U.S. territories, but under the Insular Cases of 1901, they cannot do so. As Justice Gorsuch put it in a case decided 4 days ago, the United States v. Mondero, the Insular Cases have no foundation in the Constitution and rest instead on racial stereotypes. They have no place in our law.
I believe that through the amendment process, the 17th Amendment and Article 1, Section 2, Clause 1 could be amended to let the citizens of the territories vote for representatives and senators, because voting is a fundamental right. And currently, over 4 million people in the territories are disenfranchised.
To use a personal example, my father is from England, and he's been living in this country for 20 years and is a lawful permanent resident. He's taxed by the federal government and the Oregon state government, but gets no formal form of representation. Recently in New York, they allowed lawful residents to vote in the mayoral election, which I think is a step forward for giving representation to these individuals that might have a citizenship, a legal citizenship to another country, but an emotional attachment to a different country like the United States. I think that is something that's important to recognize.
Thank you.
Susan, some of these guys must have been tapping into our judges
They did.
this morning with the Gorsuch thing. That was pretty good. Did the Constitution give me the right to vote, or was I born with it? If some document or something gives you a right, then presumably it can take it away if it wants to. So did the Constitution give it to me, or is that a fundamental right I was born with, and what the Constitution did was just list it as a right that I have?
Well, during the Constitutional Convention, the founders had this prevailing view that the right to vote should only be extended to an elite group of citizens who could better protect the constitutional freedoms and liberties. And James Madison also asserted that people with property would be best or would best protect the minorities?
The Constitution may have not given specifically you the right to vote, but it explicitly said in the 15th Amendment, which gave Black men the right to vote, or the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote, or the 26th Amendment, which gave 18 and 21-year-olds to 18 to 20-year-olds the right to vote. They gave, that was a specific amendment.
However, I think that a fundamental right is something that cannot be so easily infringed. I think you see for the decades after Reconstruction, scholar Rick Field said the most important fact about the 15th Amendment was that it was circumvented for over a century. So perhaps, it's a fundamental right that should be given to everyone. And I believe that strongly, but it just has not been. And I think that's a question that we still struggle with.
And to ground this in your original question, I would say that, like my colleague Jordan just said, you are in theory born with this right. But may I finish my thought, please?
Yes, you may.
In theory, you might be born with this right. In the reality, depending on your identity, be it race or not race, maybe whether you're disabled or elderly, you might not actually be able to see that right through to its fullest extent.
I'm afraid you're right.
Let's congratulate the students. Thank you very much, students. And thank you very much to your wonderful teacher and judges. It's now time for you to give feedback.
Thank you. Let me congratulate you on an excellent job on your presentation this morning. I think it was very comprehensive in talking about the ability to vote and the constitutional provisions and statutory provisions applicable to the right to vote. The statistics you cited on the very small percentage of fraud in voting, I think was significant, as was, of course, your mention of the Shelby County case. I thought that your answers to the questions were good. I would have liked to have heard a little bit more about racial gerrymandering. You talked about Baker v. Carr, which is one person, one vote, and the Rucher case, which deals with partisan gerrymandering, but you might have said a little bit more about racial gerrymandering. And also in terms of discussing the amendments, I would have liked to have heard a little bit about the 24th Amendment, which prohibits poll taxes. And I'm sure you're familiar with that, but that might have been something to mention. But overall, I think you did a really nice job in answering all of the questions that we had.
I too enjoyed our time together, and 10 minutes just went by. I was so shocked when she put up the time, the time sign. I like the fact that you have spent time, you've obviously been thinking about this. I was trying to throw you a little bit on trying to see which did you think was more of a danger, a suppression of voting, as you said, with the various requirements to become a voter or to be a voter, such as the ID laws. And you did a nice job of citing the Crawford versus Marion County, because I am from Indiana and I remember that very well, and having to show, I have to show IDs all the time. But you also did a nice job too on taking the other people who took the position on the gerrymandering. And when you talked about the gerrymandering, you were just starting to get into those phrases. I'm so used to hearing the cracking and packing. You mentioned packing, but I'm not sure. I heard cracking. You didn't use the words, but I was expecting it, but you did actually define what it was with the racial one. So that was very nice. But I enjoyed our discussion, and I wish you the best. Job well done. Thank you.
Yeah, I echo everything they said in the judge's room, fellas, while we were getting ready.
Yes.
Susan said that the really good teams will mention the Gorsuch ruling, which is only 96 hours old, and you did it. And all three of our heads snapped up when you did it. Okay, all right, they did it. There's one. Now, here's the thing I'm going to have to keep track of all day. I live 4 minutes from the Shelby County line, and we're going to see 12 teams today. I'm thinking at least 10 times I'm going to hear Shelby v. Holder. Yesterday, I got letters from the Birmingham jail all day, so I'm just ready. I'm making myself ready today. The last thought that I have is all the members of Congress have gone home for the weekend, and y'all are there. So why don't y'all run over there and fix some of this stuff while you're there? Get the president to sign it before they get back, and we will all breathe easier if y'all will go do that. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's show our appreciation again for the students.